started with this session. It's going to last about 40 minutes. We expect that there'll be some folks dribbling in here over the next few minutes. So what we're going to talk about today, and I want to thank our panelists for coming in to discuss this. A lot of them came a long way. Options to identify and train your workforce panel. So this is being videoed, so we're going to use this information over and over again. So there's a lot of things that we're going to learn about this. I do want to introduce from Fletcher, pardon me, I just was in a conversation, I'm still in it. Christine Strickland is from Chancellor at
Fletcher Technical Community.
Yeah, why don't you say a little bit about yourself so that people know where you're kind of coming from, and we'll get into the questions later. But just, so I'll have each of you to say who you are and what you do.
All right. Good morning, everyone. Dr. Christine Strickland. I'm the Chancellor at Fletcher Technical Community College. I've been there for about 8 years now. Fletcher typically and historically has served the Bayou region, Terrebonne, Lafourche, Assumption, and a little bit of St. Mary's Parish. Providing education and training, everything from short-term certifications all the way up through an associate's degree. Our main focuses have historically been in oil and gas, in agriculture, our fishing community, nursing and allied health, and we've recently expanded into the areas of business and information technology or computer services. So lots happening down in our region, and excited to be here.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Kate Wendell. I'm the Director of Economic and Workforce Development for an organization called JEDCO. JEDCO is the Economic Development Agency for Jefferson Parish. We're 35 years strong. I've been there about 7 years now. We have a team of about 20 folks that focus on helping our businesses, whether it's small startup businesses or helping our existing businesses expand and grow jobs in the parish or attracting new industries. And we have always had kind of as one of our cluster industries has been culinary and seafood. So we have a booth here today. We'd love to chat with any of you all about how we can possibly help you as you grow your company and your business.
Thank you, Kelly.
Hi, my name is Kelly Couch. I'm from Couch Application Service, and I am an agent that assists small business employers with H-2A, mostly the ag, and then we have some H-2B, and I've been doing this about 35 years.
Hey everyone, Laura Picarello. I'm from Texas Sea Grant. I am the Program Director for Sustainable Fisheries and Aquaculture over there. I've been in Texas about 5 years. Before that, I was in Louisiana for about 5 years, working with some of the commercial fisheries here as well, and do work broadly across the Gulf of Mexico. I think one of the discussions, bringing Texas into the fold today was really just talking about some of the things we do a little bit differently with our commercial fleets in terms of use of H-2B, visa workers, and some of the different structures in our fisheries. But there's a couple of different efforts and endeavors for workforce development that I'm happy to chat about.
Okay, thank you. And so I didn't introduce myself. I'm Thomas Emel. I'm with LSU Ag Center in Sea Grant. I work with the commercial seafood industry across the coast and up into the up north into Jonesville zone and all that as well, and do a lot of different things with seafood, and we just see all the changes happening, and workforce is a huge issue going forward.
Okay.
My colleague here.
I'm Sue Bowie. I'm also a fisheries extension agent. I cover the southwest portion of Louisiana, St. Mary, Iberia, and Vermilion. I work with commercial fishermen, mainly the offshore fleet shrimpers. So I've been working for Louisiana Sea Grant and LSU Ag Center for a number of years now. So I'm glad to meet everybody here on the panel.
Thank you. So let me just kind of frame the situation. So Tu and I were talking about, and workforce has been a topic that we've addressed or tried to address to have this conversation with this topic, because we don't have the people to do the jobs that are required. And this is not something local or something just to the seafood industry, which requires a lot of labor, a big labor force. But you're seeing it all across the country at restaurants and other places. And in seafood, we're not unique. It's the same everywhere else. And I was talking to a friend who's in the seafood business in Mexico. He can't get any workers. So it's like everybody's got this problem. So we need to rethink how we're going to do this business. I mean, we're in a big change now with the way supply chain is shifted. It's very different with COVID, with hurricanes, with economic challenges. This business, I've never seen it in such a big state of flux, and it's hitting everybody. So what we wanted to do today is talk about what are some of the things that we're seeing, what are the opportunities we can do in education, or foreign guest workers an option? If so, how do we do that? What are the limits in that? What is Texas doing? Their fleet is different than our fleets, and so how do we populate this and make some things happen? It's going to require input from all of these specialty disciplines of the folks that are represented here, and so let's kind of dive into it. So I'm going to turn too loose on the questions and ask, and we'll just walk it forward, and it's going to be rather fluid. We've got 40 minutes, and we want to make sure that we get, while we've got them here, we want to get as much information out here to the group as we can. And this won't be the last time we sit down and talk about this. This is going to be one of the top issues that we're going to have to deal with in this state.
Okay. So for a few years now, we've said, workforce development. We're facing an aging fleet in our industry. So how do we change? How do we go about? Most people, if they're in their retirement age, when you talk to a fisherman, they'll say, okay, I'm going to sell my business, I'm going to go do something else, or I'm ready to retire, really. But what we have is, there are folks that are still in the industry that want to continue this business. And then even the ones that are retiring, they still want to see their business continue, even if they're not actively fishing. So, Laura, I'll start off with you, okay? So you and I talked a little bit about how the fleet is aging. There's things that Louisiana does differently from Texas. Let's dive a little bit deeper than that. Tell us how the challenges that Texas has, and then how have y'all overcome those challenges with workforce development?
Well, certainly in progress.
Okay.
So a lot of things, for Texas, I will say a few of the things that are different for us is that even our state level fisheries are limited entry fisheries, which is very different than Louisiana. Oh, is that better? Okay. So we have a lot more limitations even on our inshore fisheries in terms of bringing people in and engaging with our fleet. But on the offshore fleet levels, we do have very similar challenges to what Louisiana is facing, particularly with the shrimp industry. In Texas, we have for many years, and we are one of the few fisheries that utilize H-2B seasonal visa workers on vessels. I know many of you here in Louisiana utilize the H-2B system for processing plants and facilities, and we thought that was a really great solution for a long time. And for us, being a border state with Mexico and connections to fishermen once upon a time before we all closed off our EEZs, there was really a natural flow. We were able to bring some people in through the H-2B visa program, already with some fishing experience in Mexico that came over here, worked seasonally, went back. I think when you look at the shrimp fishery and you look at a fishery where for offshore, and the economics of it at this point, you've got people out on boats 40, 50, 60 days. That's a really hard recruitment. And H-2B workers are a really positive, they're here to work. That's what they're coming here for. That's what they're dedicated to. They're kind of prepared and willing to do that type of work onshore or offshore on a vessel for that time period and not be at a loss for not being able to come home, see family, and things like that. The shrimp fishery in particular, it's been a challenge. And so, that was a great system. It was a filter system for about 20 years that, several of our fleets have been doing this. And in the last kind of 5 or 6 years, we've started to really see what some of the disadvantages and challenges of that system are. And so the pros and the cons, there are some benefits to it and there are some options, but what we've seen is, to be a captain in a federal fleet, you have to be a U.S. citizen.
Right.
And as we have had our crews come through, and we have returning workers in our fleets that have been coming for 20 years as crew. And so as their captains are aging out, if they have not moved towards trying to gain citizenship, they can't take over that vessel. So we've trained crews that can't become captains. Thank you so much, Evelyn. I asked her to grab that.
So the H-2B program is one that we don't do in Louisiana. We see that with processors, we see that in the crawfish industry, but we haven't seen that in our commercial fishing fleet yet, except for in the oyster industry. So that's one way of going about it. And like you said, there were some challenges to the H-2B workers getting labor through the H-2B program.
Yeah, and so prior to the last couple of years, there was what was called a returning worker exemption in the program. So once you were in the system, if you paid your taxes, you upheld all the rules of the program, you were eligible to come back year to year. And so we have had returning workers coming for years. But about 4 or 5 years ago, we lost the returning worker exemption and basically got tossed back into a limited pool of visas that you had to apply for every year. And so our access to workers became incredibly limited. So even though we weren't looking at large numbers of visas to work on our vessels, we now are in a lottery system that annually we have to apply for. We may or may not get selected. And if you're relying on at least 2 to 3 of your crew members to come from that visa program, we have had vessels for the past several years tied up at docks because they don't have the crews now that they need, even the guys that have been coming year to year. There have also been a couple of other changes to the program that have made that challenging. So certainly that lottery system has affected the seafood industry as a whole, and there is a lot of work in DC right now working on that legislation and trying to look at whether there's an option for a seafood exemption similar to the fact that agriculture has its own bucket. There's some push to try to get that returning worker exemption back so we can kind of get that existing workforce that we so regularly used for a while. I think if there's resolution to some of those issues, the program still has a lot of viability, but as it stands right now, it's kind of wreaked havoc.
Okay, so that's one challenge, and that's one avenue to go with, is through the H-2B worker for boats. Now, I understand that Texas also does something different where you guys are ran by a fleet. Well, basically you have a fleet that the docks are also your brokers that are distributing your product.
So yeah, our structure, our supply chain structure is a little bit different than a lot of the other ports. Most of our offshore shrimpers don't sell to a dock or a processor directly. They actually retain the ownership of their shrimp. So they pay a processing fee to have their shrimp offloaded and go through processing, but they still have the right to bid and sell that shrimp to any supplier or buyer that they want. And so it's a very different system than selling directly to a dock and then not knowing where that shrimp goes, or they have a little bit more control over price or where that shrimp is headed.
Okay.
Let's shift a little bit and kind of look at how do we grow, and we're going to come back to H-2B because there's a lot to discuss there, but I want to talk to the economic development folks and to the community college folks. And so let's go local, and if you could talk to me about what JEDCO's doing and how they're seeing this locally, and then we'll shift over and talk about how the community colleges see themselves creating workforce, maybe different kinds of people coming into this from different angles, programs that can be created locally to maybe tap into a pool of folks that would have never considered even being in this business. So.
Sure, absolutely. Thank you, Thomas. It is, and you mentioned, unprecedented. This industry is not alone in the workforce challenges that we're seeing now, and we're not quite sure what the end is in sight. So everyone is in this boat literally together, if that helps at all. Sometimes there's strength in numbers. JEDCO works very closely with a lot of workforce partners. We are an economic development agency, so our services range from financing opportunities to site searches to incentive assistance. But a lot of what we do is interface. We work with a lot of resources. And so JEDCO is for Jefferson Parish, but we work under the GNO Inc. umbrella, which is a 10-parish region, so then you've got an expanded kind of workforce focus, if you will. We also would encourage anybody to reach out to your local Economic Development Commission, because they will very often have information or connections or resources that you might not be aware of. And I like when people walk up and say, what can you do to help me? You know, let's have this conversation. What are your challenges? I will say in Jefferson Parish, there has been some very proactive approaches in our public school system. So the Jefferson Parish public school system is the largest in the state of Louisiana. It's the most diverse in the state of Louisiana. And they're working now to get kids 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th grade understanding that college is not the only path, or college might be a step in the process, so it's college but not yet. And so they're really focusing on the certifications, getting folks understanding that they can come out of school with certifications that will put them directly into the workforce. And that's a real shift from the last couple of generations, where I know with my family, I was told, you're going to college. You have to go and you have to pay for it. That's pretty much what I was told. And my kids, you know, I gave them the same message. One went, one didn't. And you know, the one that didn't is making 3 times as much money as the one that went to college. So it's about education and taking that stigma off of the fact that, you know, this might be a path that isn't actually a very rewarding path. So that's really been our focus, and I would say the resources are such a key part of that. There's somebody out there that has the answer or can assist. And we work very closely with Delgado, which is the community college system in our region, so I'm anxious to hear what Fletcher has to say as well.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Strickland? Sure.
So you hit on a number of important topics there. Right now, I think that what we're seeing is a huge shift. And we recognize in the community college system that we play a critical role in getting more workforce opportunities out to individuals and broadening the perspective. And so we're taking it from very much a varied pathway kind of approach. So we are not only looking at the student who is in high school and working to embed more of the short-term certifications, the industry-based credentials in our high schools, so that those students, when they graduate high school, could potentially go directly to work or could continue on to the next level of certification, but to expand horizons in terms of what career opportunities are. I hear from far too many students who are graduating these days that, you know, when they meet with the high school counselor, they're either going to be a nurse or a teacher, maybe a lawyer, maybe a doctor at some point, but we haven't had conversations about the full scope of employment opportunities that exist in the state, and really what are our major industries, whether it be in our fisheries or in our ag community or even in our oil and gas community, sometimes very segmented, especially by region. And so broadening those conversations. But the other part of solving this challenge that we have statewide is really re-engagement of our adult population. We have a significant number of adults in Louisiana who have not completed high school and who are not currently in the workforce. So how we re-engage our adult population to get them back into the workforce, to get them back skilled up so that they can access some of these jobs is one of the critical things that the community college system around the state is looking at. Our focus has shifted. We are doing more in industry-based credentials, in short-term certifications, and we're seeing the benefits of that. Especially post-COVID, there are far more individuals who say, I want to just get skills and I need to get to work. And so we're looking at that. And to your point, we just recently did an analysis in the state of Louisiana. An individual with a short-term certification on average makes about $5,000 more than an individual with an associate's degree, and almost $15,000 more than somebody with a bachelor's. So it's fascinating to watch how this actually equates out to salaries and income for families in the state with just those short-term certifications. So one of the things that I wanted to mention too, that we've seen in the community college system, actually 2 things. One is there is plenty of funding. So if you know of individuals who need upskilling, retraining, need new skill sets to do some of the work, especially as things are transitioning in kind of this new economic environment we're in, There are dollars to do that. I tell most people these days, if you are entering a career pathway that is a high demand pathway, I can pretty much get you a credential for free. So if you haven't already, reach out to your local community college, begin exploring what dollars they have available to you as an employer. There are certainly dollars available there, or if you're just trying to create a new workforce for your own business. We also can do customized for industry, and I think that's important. The other thing that I think is a real opportunity that we have not yet capitalized on in this industry in particular is working together collectively to promote the career pathways and the credentials. We at Fletcher have seen tremendous success when our energy companies have united to say we just want to promote line worker as a career pathway. Doesn't matter if you go work for Entergy or Sleeka or Consolidated Government, but we need people getting trained and getting to work. And so they collectively have come together to market careers, to market wages, to market opportunities that goes far beyond what many times an individual company could do all on their own. And so leveraging that collective across the state or across a region, I think is really critical to how we really get the message out about the opportunities that exist in this arena for workforce.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Strickland. Let's go into guest worker labor and the whole immigration thing. And when I first came here in '85, working with the industry, there were, most of the people working in the processing plants were locals. There were locals that would do that kind of work and did it well. And then it was the migration of Vietnamese, Laotian, and other Asian groups into that industry. They were the people at the table working. And then, you know, then the boats, the fishing boats, and two works with that community very closely. So there's been these groups come and kind of go. And so who's coming next? You know, who's coming next? It's like I was driving in and I saw a chicken place in town here that I had never seen before called Pollo Campero, which I ate at one of those in El Salvador years ago.
Guatemala.
Yeah, they're all over, and there's taco stands everywhere and all that. And so there's a big migration of Hispanic people from south of the border, from South America, Central America, Mexico, etc. And who are they? And if you look at H2B, and I've worked with H2B a lot, maybe more than I want to do, but I've worked with Kelly with that, and that's the world that she's in. She helps bring in those workers, those guest workers in, to help in these processing plants and in these farms. And there's a reason. There's a reason that that happens. And it's ultimately economic, but the fact that who are they? How does the system work? Is there an unlimited supply? Well, clearly there's not. But so Kelly, if you could share with us your experience and who are these people? Who's bringing them in? How do they use them? How can we make the best use of that? Is there some political angles to this that need to be addressed and all? Because workforce, I have seen crawfish plants not operate, just like boats have not operated, because they did not have that labor. So this is absolutely, it is the labor pool that's available, that if we could get more of those folks to come in, maybe it'll solve some things in the short term, but the long term it's going to have to be something else. So Kelly, what's your world look like out there with all that?
Well, the H2B world is just upside down right now. It's pretty much become a political football. Into 2003 was the first year the cap is reached. Now, the way the H2B program is, you work through multiple different governmental agencies. The Department of the Labor will certify unlimited H2B visas. However, Homeland Security can only issue 66,000 visas per year. Now that 66,000, probably about in 2003, was split into two caps. So it releases on April 1 and October 1. The many steps involved, start with the Department of Labor. So, first of all, you have to have a valid job. It has to be seasonal. It has to be, it's for anybody that is not growing the product. You have the H2A program that is directly for the farmers that are growing. And then you have the H2B program that is the secondary market. For the rice, you have the rice mills. For the sugar cane, you have the sugar mills. And we have the crawfish plants and the shrimp plants. And just everybody has their own processing. So any secondary processing goes to the H2B side. That being said, the job has to be certified. So you have to describe all the details of your position, and you submit this request for a prevailing wage determination. So the Department of Labor will review the job, review the parish that you're going to be working in, and then they will assign a wage. So just for an example, even though minimum wage is, what, $7.25 an hour, for a crawfish peeler in Iberville Parish, it was $15.04, but they came back and said that wage had to be paid. The wage in, I'm trying to think of somebody else, Lafayette was $14.38, I think it was, Brobridge. But anyway, so you submit for your prevailing wage. So if you're wanting workers in the spring, I'm submitting for that prevailing wage the July before. So we're working 6 and 8 months ahead. There is nothing fast about the process. So then when you get to the 90-day mark, the Department of Labor gives you a 15-day rolling window. The earliest you can apply is 90 days out, the latest is 75 days. But if you don't start on that day 90, chances are you're not even going to get in the group. About 4 or 5 years ago, we crashed the Department of Labor's program in the middle of the night, at midnight, through the night. So after that and several lawsuits, they decided, well, this isn't the way to go. So then they switched to a 3-day window submission. So we haven't had that issue any longer. But they get so many applications within that window. I just looked it up. They had 7,503 applications, and this was like January 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and it was for 123,791 applicants. Now, there's only 66,000 visas, and they're split 33 and 33. So what they do then is they put you in a lottery, and they assign you a group. So they had assigned groups A through F this year. Group A is allotted 35,000 visas. So Group A is going to take up all of the spring cap. And then every group after that gets 20,000. I did just check for, they had 501 applications filed in January. And they have certified to date 1. And they have all the other remaining. So, with that being said, anybody at 2 of mine were pulled, and one's in Group E and one's in Group F. So, in the meantime, this is just trying to get a certification so that you can move forward from them to go to Homeland Security. So your chances of getting workers, if you're after that date, drop dramatically. So, we have the 66,000 visas that are allotted yearly. And of that 66,000, these people are brand new. They can, they don't have to have been here before. They can have been here before, but they don't have to be here before. So that being said, what they've done is they went back and, like the returning worker program that we were speaking of, they looked at all that had been issued before in previous years returning. Because in prior years, the returning worker was unlimited. It wasn't accounted. So they weren't, as long as the job had been screened, the employer had been screened, and then the workers were screened, that number was unlimited. So then politically, that didn't go over very well. So they said, okay, the most we're gonna let you bring in for returning workers is the total amount that have entered previously. So they added up that number, and then they made a chart, and it's a huge chart, and it's all types of moving parts to it. But in April, they're gonna release a certain amount of returning workers, and then there's a certain amount allotted to the Northern Mariana Islands, and then there's a certain percentage allotted to Africa and Guatemala and Costa Rica. So they've divided it up, and they're dispersing some in April and some in October.
Okay.
And then it also, there's a lot of tag-along extra rules that, like, you have to be 45 days past the release, and they had to ran out by X amount of date, and so there's a lot of moving parts to that.
So Kelly, I'm hearing that there are lots of challenges in the
Lots
H-2B
of
program.
problems.
So
And
for
it-
somebody
Yeah.
who is a boat owner or part of the commercial fishing industry, it would be hard for them to navigate that on their own, it sounds like to me.
It
Yes.
is, it's difficult for us to keep up with moving parts,
Okay.
let alone an
And I've
individual.
even heard that with the processor plants who have bigger businesses,
Right.
how they usually just,
There's no reliability to the program now.
okay,
Because even though you had the returning worker, then you still have to make that lottery, because
so there's a
they
lot of
just
hoops to
ran
jump
out-
through
right,
to get
exactly.
there
They just
before
ran
you
out
get
of
your
the
worker.
April visas, and you have people that are sitting in line just waiting to get a labor certification. I will say that the program's not used wisely, because on the H-2B side, you can have workers here up to 10 months out of the year, but most of these processing plants don't use many months out of
Right.
their.
Right, so you want to get them in at the right moment when you have a job
So-
for them,
So a visa,
because you're
when
still
it is
paying
issued-
$15 and more.
When a visa is issued, you're actually allotted 36 months. So that person could come work for you for 10 months, come work for me for 10 months, come work here, but they've got to stay in country. With the
So is
workers,
that really
no.
allowed for them to do different
It is.
jobs? Okay,
It
so
is.
we were always under this understanding that they could only do that one job that they came for.
But it's very difficult to use, because
Okay.
all these dates have to line up. This one has to end, this one has to start, this one has to end, this one has to start. But if we were better users of the program, we might have more workers. But until then, most employers want, these are my workers, I want them to work 10 months, they go home for 2 months, come back to me 10 months, go
Mhm.
home.
So it sounds like if
So
we
we're not
work
getting
together,
good
let's say crawfish ends, shrimp starts,
Right.
then we could actually utilize our workforce.
But most of the time, these workers don't want to do that either. You
Okay,
know, they want to go home. They want to come, do their job, go home.
okay, okay. Laura, did you have something to add?
Well, and I was just gonna say, you know, we've tried a couple of different tactics to navigate over the last few years to try to deal with this well, in terms of, do we get a bigger group of vessel owners and fleets going in together and apply once, and so we're a bigger package together, and then they split that, because it used to be easier for them to apply as a group together and go through all that process, but now they're all applying separately because their chances of being picked in the lottery, but then it's
Your
only for
chances
one
are
foot
higher,
here or
yes.
there, or, so we've tried a bunch of different ways to kind of like navigate the system and play with it, and we have looked at trying to pair, you know, that partnership with other industry, but because of, yeah, some of the timing issues and some of the way that in which you have to go through the reporting, and somebody, like the responsibility for that person falls on the business because they're the ones sponsoring it, and so there are some concerns that if you're only overseeing that person for part of the time, and then another business is responsible for them the other part of the time, there's concerns over, you know, so I think there's a lot of ways to try to improve the way that we use the system, but there's been a lot of hurdles. We've
So it
tried
sounds like
everything.
communication, transparency amongst different agencies, like different groups, to really work together to make that program flow more, to utilize it better. Yeah.
And I just
It's
think in
important.
general, more communication about the program, like people have a lot of misconceptions about the
Exactly.
H-2B visa program and what it means for seasonal workers to come over here. They don't realize that they're paying taxes. They're doing all these things. If they don't pay their taxes before they leave, they can never come back into the program again. Things like that, that I think there's just a lot of perceptions that continue to make this program not attractive and popular. And so, you
And I
know,
think that's why it's scary for a boat or a commercial industry like in Louisiana, where we haven't done the H-2B worker program, to actually say, let's go and do this. And especially for one business like a boat to say, I'm going to do this on my own, it seems like there's a lot of hurdles to jump through.
and you can't do it without somebody to help you through the process.
Right.
Even people who've been doing it for 20 years still have people that help them through it.
Well, and a lot of people are just, it's so unreliable, they just choose to, I have a shrimp plant that, you know, they just can't operate on a maybe. We'll get visas one out of every 5 years, because that's pretty much, now it's probably about 1 out of every 8 years.
So we're quickly running out of time. It seems like we just got started. There's lots and lots in here, a lot of expertise here. And so I'd like for each of you just to make a kind of a wrap-up comment from the world as you see things. And I think we've laid out a lot of interesting concepts here. We know we're going to have to gather together and powwow on labor. We're just getting started on this because of the need. So to start, Christine?
So I think for me, one of the big takeaways of this is working more collectively as an industry, whether it's in that sector of the H-2Bs or your local. But secondly, pursuing all your options. You know, the H-2B process might be an option for some, but I think the other thing we've learned over the times in working with different industries at the community colleges is developing local workforce talent allows you to have individuals who stay local and will stay with you longer term, which provides a little more consistency in workforce. My other big ask and probably takeaway would be that I think historically the community colleges and the fishing community really have not been well connected. They've been sort of insular. And so now I think is the time for us to begin breaking down some of those communication walls. So for you all to welcome community colleges sort of into your conversations about workforce needs, reaching out, letting us know where we can intersect with you is really critically important, because I think working together we can solve some of this, but we at the community college need to make sure we understand what you need in a workforce so that we can then deliver that. So I think working collectively and then just working better in terms of communicating needs back and forth and what we can do collectively together.
Well, that's a perfect segue. JEDCO serves on the Workforce Development Board for our region, and that board took very proactive action to take the Job Center, what used to be called the Unemployment Office, is now the American Job Center, and we moved that from a kind of a fairly remote, not a remote location, but we've moved it over to the Churchill Park Delgado Advanced Manufacturing Campus. And that freed up dollars that allowed the Job Center to become mobile. So now they have laptops and they have transportation, and they're seeking opportunities to go out into the community and find that potential workforce that's not coming to them looking for a job. So be aware of that as an opportunity. Connect with your Job Center, and if you've got a fair or a festival or a church or a community center that might want to host them so that you can interact directly with them and get your community understanding of the jobs that are available, the training that's available, free and easy. They're walking away with training and no kind of debt. So just be aware of that as well. I think for Jefferson Parish, but every region has a Job Center.
I do have a couple of suggestions. Now, I think we need to be more thinking outside the box. There is, Puerto Ricans and any U.S. territories do not have to have a work visa. Now, you would still have to pay their transportation. So if somebody would kind of investigate that avenue, that's a suggestion, because you would not be under the Department of Labor setting your wage. You would still have to pay their transportation in and out, go find you a family that needed a reliable job, bring them over here. You could educate their children, change their way of life, and it would change yours as well. Also, the H-2B program used to also be the avenue that we brought in our baseball farm teams and our supermodels. And politically, they quietly moved those off and made their own visa. And the H-2B program did not come under fire until the landscapers figured out that this was a program that they could utilize. We never ran out of visas until 2003. And ever since then, the landscape percentage has increased dramatically, and the seafood is fighting for their industry. So I think that if the political world would realize that for every farmer, we have to have a processor. You know, crawfish, rice, all the crops, all the seafood, and if they can move the models and the baseball players to their own unlimited, uncounted visa, I think that this would be a good avenue to pursue politically. So that would be my suggestion.
That absolutely is.
coming in.
I just know that, you know, that's just not fair. You need food to, you know, survive. You don't need baseball.
Yeah, I think there's some great points in there from all of you, and I appreciate that. For those of you who know me know I can talk forever, but I'm going to try not to do that, particularly on this topic. There's kind of three things I really want to highlight quickly, and then I will be around all day, so feel free to come hit me up, or I'd love to chat with y'all some more. Is one, I think one of the things that we can't ignore is the economics of this industry, is that you can't attract a good labor force if there isn't money to be made in the industry, and that was one of the points that came out to address that. It's great that there's money there for the training programs, but if you're sending people into an industry that's really losing its economic value, so it's hard, and I think we've seen that extensively in this past year, particularly with the shrimp industry that's going through huge economic issues right now. You can't attract labor if you can't pay them well. And so it's a bit of an endless cycle. You can't get the job done and get your product out there if you don't have the labor, but you can't get the labor if you're not getting good money for your product. So I think there's a lot to be said for the industries about what their market looks like, who you're targeting as your market, how you can innovate to better provide a product that you're going to get more value for, and how you're dealing with that. The other thing is, you know, the structure of this industry is really challenging. I have been, and didn't mention a whole lot of, working on trying to develop fishermen training programs for some federal fleets worldwide, and we've looked at Department of Labor programs, we've looked at some community college training programs and things like that. But the structures of the way the fishing industry works can be really challenging. There's liability issues if you want to do any training on the water. There's challenges with the fact that we don't pay most of our crews, and the way that we pay our structure in the industry, we don't qualify for Department of Labor type programs for internships or apprenticeships or things along those lines, because we can't promise a job that has a specific hourly wage and a specific structure. We pay based on vessel shares, things along those lines that have made those programs really challenging for us to utilize. So I'd really love to talk more about how we overcome some of those challenges in developing better training programs. So innovation I kind of touched. So one other real quick tidbit is, you know, we are a very male-dominated industry still, and I say this from the perspective of a recent talk that I saw on workforce in the United States as a whole, where I was kind of flabbergasted at the arrows going upwards of female workforce and the arrows going significantly downwards for male workforce. And I think that just takes a mentality shift on the way our industry operates and runs. And there's a lot of traditions and values and cultures involved in that, but I think we really need to sort of expand our perspective about who we're targeting and what workforce is available to us. And I think as a woman in this industry, sometimes it can be a really intimidating industry to be involved in. So just thinking about that from that perspective, that are we actually like tapping into a really big workforce in the US that isn't traditionally attractive for this industry? So that's much be all stop because I know we're out of time. But.
Thank you all so very much for wonderful insights, for this conversation. I know that we're going to be visiting on this again. I'm going to get my ticket to Puerto Rico. Fill up the plane.
Can I come with you?
Yeah, you go.
This is the field trip to like Samoa or something like that?
This really is the tip of the iceberg that we've hit. So more conversations to follow. I hope we can open up those communication lines. And at the end of the day, when we look at our commercial fishing fleet, we have our small commercial fishing fleet and our big boat commercial fishing fleet. So they run completely different, you know? And so at the end of the day, it's how do we get our product to stop being a commodity type product? How do we get into some niche marketing with our boats that are coming in with 50,000 pounds of shrimp? They can't exactly direct market. Those are the things that we need to think outside of the box for. I think with all of our expertise, if we drop our titles, we may be able to have some conversations that are very meaningful. And I think that's what we did today. So just a little touch of that.
All right. So thank you and all. Thank you for the audience for being so attentive. And if we I wish we had time for questions, but we got to move on and get the next group up here. And so thank you. Thank everybody.